Difficulty as a concept is, ironically, difficult to nail down, and discussing the concept in the realm of Souls-likes has been risky at best. However, this is a key aspect to these types of games, considering that death, the chance for recovery, and punishment for risky play are a major factor in the Souls-like genre, making sure that there are plentiful opportunities for players to see that iconic "you died" screen. That being said, what exactly does it mean for a game to be difficult? And why do so many fans of the genre enjoy playing a series of games that consistently stops them from accessing the rest of the game until they can get good? Well, let me explain this through example, specifically with an example of a game that nails the difficulty of a Souls-like genre: Clash: Artifacts of Chaos. Oh, and it's worth mentioning now that I'll be using the term genre a lot in tandem with the genre tag of Souls-like, which is a bit controversial among the community because of the proliferation of hyperbolic games communication comparing anything with a minor amount of difficulty to Dark Souls. In this case, however, I'll be using the Souls-like genre terms in order to describe games with a replenishable healing item, resting sites that respawn nearby enemies, and replenish player health and materials, and deliberate third-person combat that doesn't include any intentional ability to cancel animations early. I have a lot more to say on genre in the future, but for now, let's get back to talking about the difficulty that permeates these games. So, for any Souls fan unfamiliar with this title, Clash is an incredible Souls-like from 2023. Developed by Ace Team, the devs behind the Xenoclash series from the early 2010s, but what do I mean when I say that the game nails difficulty perfectly? Well, that starts with the time to kill for bosses, which in a Souls-like is a bit more complicated than the number of trigger pulls in a game like Valorant. Let's break it down into two parts. Part the first, the actual time it takes to bring an ordinary enemy, major encounter, or boss from full health to dead. Well, in Clash, the answer ranges from pretty quick to a hot minute to a few fights lasting almost 5 minutes in total. The final boss gauntlet, in fact, is a series of the most brutal and difficult fights in the entire game, each one including several minutes of heart-pumping action, split up only by enough time to replenish my flasks and move on. On the other hand, the weakest enemies, usually the natural fauna of this wacky world of Xenozoic, can sometimes be taken down in a single combo. The rest is regular fights that give players a massive power fantasy while they control Pseudo, alongside tough-as-nails encounters that last several minutes at a time. But the actual fight itself is only half the equation. The other is the time it takes to learn. Part the second, the time investment required to understand a fight enough to finally come out on top. That right there is the key for a Souls-like. It's an entirely subjective experience that can be difficult to explain or even understand from the perspective of the player. Why did it take 2 hours to beat Moonsun, or 12 hours to beat Radahn, or several days to beat Moog? Like seriously, what the fuck was that? Get the shackle, idiot. Sorry, that's an unrelated video. But yeah, the time it takes to learn a new boss from start to finish and get that kill. How exactly do we quantify this? Well, to push the subjective skill, reaction speeds, and experience in the genre from player to player out of the equation, let's look at what the player isn't in control of: the design of the boss themselves. Let's take Moonsun as a prime example. For one, because we fight him early enough for it to not be much of a spoiler, and also because this is the boss that took me the longest to overcome. There are two aspects to this fight that make it difficult. One being the ads roaming around in the arena alongside the boss, but a little focus will take them down pretty quickly. The second being this triple swing. It's an incredibly powerful attack, and getting caught by the first hit usually meant getting wombo comboed long enough to not survive the third. However, there's a pretty obvious tell before it swings up, and can easily be avoided with a quick backstep. The main obstacle for me here is the third attack that almost feels like it comes out of nowhere. The last hit will punish greed every time. So when it comes to this boss's design, success comes down to learning those most dangerous attacks and figuring out when to dodge and when to punish. This is the basic learning cycle for every Souls-like boss that isn't a gimmick, from Asylum Demon to Consort Radahn. That right there, however, is the key to how Clash manages to make some of its bosses exactly as difficult as they need to be for a casual playthrough. The fights themselves hardly ever last longer than 5 minutes, and it usually only takes a handful of deaths to learn what exactly it is that is killing me. and then learn how to properly retaliate. Then from there, executing on everything learned from those previous attempts is thrilling, although not every fight is on par with Moonsun, and some of the game will definitely be seen as too easy from fans of the genre, myself included at times. Lies of P or Shadow of the Erdtree, this is not. But hey, we're talking about the Souls genre here. Dark Souls and Bloodborne and Elden Ring, the bane of skill-issued players the world over. How could I possibly claim that this genre meters out difficulty in a compelling, straightforward, and fair way? Well, because they obviously do. They wouldn't have caught on if they didn't. A perfect example of what I mean here can be seen in 2014's Bound by Flame. I'd normally kick the dead horse that is Lords of the Fallen, but I hear the new one actually has a pretty solid fanbase. I can't judge. I enjoy the Surge unironically, no matter what the owl lady that says the funny fuck word says about it. Sidebar, if you enjoy the Umbral World mechanic in the new Lords of the Fallen, then definitely check out Clash. They also nail that concept so very well. Anyway, we're talking about Bound by Flame. What is truly so bad about this game's difficulty? Well, it's twofold. One, the mechanics are kinda bare bones, which makes the fights almost too easy, since there isn't much nuance to dictate whether one decision over another was the correct choice in that moment. However, to replace the deliberate nuance of Souls-likes, Bound by Flame decided to simply give enemies massive amounts of health. So instead of tough fights, we have long fights. And this isn't contained only within the boss fights, but this development mindset also infects the basic enemies, to the point that taking out what should be a basic hollow is a 5-minute escapade slapping the spongiest meat stick in all the land. Then we multiply that by 1,000 and the various enemies that will appear throughout each level. There is a logic here that when a fight takes longer, it must be more difficult, especially when making a mistake can lead to a reset and throw the player all the way back to the start of that long path, adding to the tension of making sure not to mess up. All of the parts are there, but the method towards drawing out that reaction from players is flawed. It's an obvious choice for creating tension, and there is a reason why better games don't take this approach. Take, for example, how Dark Souls 1 instead uses the difficulty in order to direct players where to go. At the start of DS1, when only considering the canon path that can be taken, as in disregarding the alternate paths that become possible when starting with the Master Key, players have 3 options of how to proceed after arriving in Lordran. You can either head down into New Londo, a dark area filled with enemies that can't be touched and kill a fresh Soul Level 1 character in a matter of seconds, or you can head into the graveyard and further down into the catacombs, where you can at least hurt the skeletons, but good luck actually killing them, especially once you get deep enough to run into the ones that respawn. Then finally, there is the somewhat innocuous-looking aqueduct at the top of the hill, behind where the player actually arrives in this area. Yeah, From Software would learn better conveyance later on. We're a long walk from the Schiefer River setup. Still, it's the final option that leads players down the intended path, with several infantry class hollows that go down with a 3-hit combo from most starting weapons and only really offer a threat if they are allowed to work in groups, alongside one soldier class enemy who manages to push players a little more thanks to a shield and a large sword to deal more damage. Continue down this path and we arrive at Undead Burg, where enemies continue to offer little in the way of difficulty, until the inflection point right here, before the tower that leads to the Taurus Demon. This isn't only because the first major boss is right past here, ready to offer players a quick death while taking several minutes of hacking away at his ankles in order to gain a win. Before we get there, we've got to contend with 2 of the soldier class hollows wielding swords, one with a spear, and a sniper ready to catch players unaware. However, that isn't the limit to the sudden increase in difficulty, as players who choose to explore only a little further will then run into the first Black Knight. This guy might as well be a mini-boss, especially to a new player unaware of the danger they found at the end of this hallway. It's the type of escalation of tension and steady dropping of inflection points that gives Dark Souls a level of difficulty that players often refer to as tough but fair, even if that isn't always entirely accurate. Still, having minor enemies who can offer a level of power fantasy before dropping an enemy who is purpose-built to snuff out that fantasy is as much a part of the design of the Soul series as the Soul currency, replenishing Estus Flask, and Soul retrieval after death. It's the secret sauce that colors the quality of imitators. And the reason games like Nioh or Lies of P are applauded as positive examples of the Souls-like genre. This is also why games like Lords of the Fallen and Bound by Flame that lack this sauce are more often a punching bag among the wider community. Although, to be completely fair to Bound by Flame, I don't know if that game was ever trying to be a Souls-like, more that it had been marketed as a Souls-like because it had come out after Dark Souls 1 and right on the heels of the Dark Souls 2 release date. On the note of Dark Souls 2, this is also why that game continues to maintain its role as the black sheep of the series, as while it makes some questionable designs and looks more janky than other titles in the official From Software catalog, it still has the sauce. DS1 and 2 are both a nice, spicy curry, but they have different meat beneath the sauce, appealing to different tastes on a more minute level. That is what brings us back to Clash. The design of the world of Xenozoic understands the need to offer fantasies of power while also hammering players with hard walls like Moonsun in order to put that fantasy in the perspective that the world, lore, and narrative demands. It indeed has the sauce, although is that all there is to it? Would a short little adventure with a hint of that Souls-like sauce really be worth spilling all this ink over? No, but fortunately for Clash, it doesn't simply copy. Instead, it throws in some new seasonings to amplify the spice of its curry, in the form of the ritual, artifacts, and the One Law. Without getting too into the weeds of the lore of Clash, the One Law means that all intelligent creatures must play out a dice game called the Ritual, and the winner gets to enact their wagered artifact against the loser in the fight that follows. This can take the form of receiving a free hit, one fighter being tethered in place, or even binding the opponent into temporary servitude in a future fight. The dice game itself is fairly simple, and shops throughout the game will give players enough advantage to win most of these encounters without having to suffer the effects of an opposing artifact. However, this is where players can choose exactly what the ritual means for their specific playthrough. Players can choose to use powerful artifacts to make some fights more approachable. They can dismiss their own artifacts in order to maintain the intended difficulty of each encounter. Or they can intentionally lose in order to handicap themselves against every intelligent enemy. There's a built-in difficulty slider that puts the ease of access to the game directly in the player's hands in most encounters that need it, and certainly to the toughest mandatory fights that are on the path towards the end of the game. This all comes together to give Clash one of the best approaches to difficulty that I've seen in the Souls-like genre, where usually crafting a more powerful build or stacking on extra armor can be the key to evening the skill threshold from fight to fight. Clash takes the Souls-like formula and integrates a way for players to get exactly what they want out of it. Want to revel in forcing enemies to fight each other through the obscuring fog? Go for it. Want to let yourself get tethered to the ground in a boss fight? Fine, add that handicap all you want. Want to see how the fight was balanced outside of the artifacts? That's your choice. It's a level of nuance that often gets lost in the conversation about difficulty in the Souls-like genre. And Clash nails it like few other games I've seen in 10 years of Dark Souls copycats. One of so many reasons this is the best game I played last year. I mean, I didn't even talk about the crafting system. Tons of collectibles with a limited scope that only waste materials when you win. What's not to love? Hey, it's that time again. The end of the video where I invite folks to come check out the Patreon. Link in the description. And make good on the rewards for those currently pledged. Patreon members get early access to new content and their names written in the credits at the end of videos. And those who pledge $5 or more get their names read out loud, like our DevBox designers, Genghis Braun, and our DevBox developers, Azul. Thanks for the support, and thanks for watching.